Hey guys, Matthew here, and today I want to bring you guys an updated guide on my week 1 currency farming edition for Path of Exile. So a few months ago, basically right before Ritual started, I made this video which was the currency making tier list, and a lot of people have been asking me to make an update as well. Obviously, a lot of things in the game have changed. A lot of nerfs came through, a lot of changes. Obviously, now we have Echoes of the Atlas, which is also something we need to account for. So there's been a lot of change, so I decided to actually go through and make an update. So we're going to use the exact same tier list. I went ahead and basically wrote down what each of these actually stand for, so you can, pause that and have a look. If you're wondering, I'll basically be putting this to the side for myself. Okay, so let's get right into it. There's a lot of things that have changed, like I said, and this is probably going to be not too long of a video, but there's a lot to talk about, of course. So first off, we have Ancient Orb. Ancient Orb is basically for gambling headhunters. Now, obviously, this has changed a lot. You no longer need to be in a Nemesis map to be able to get a Headhunter. You can actually just get a Headhunter from like Kitava. You can just randomly get a Headhunter anywhere in the game. This does not mean that these are more common at all. The thing is, lastly, we had a very, very good way of actually farming for Ancient Orbs, which was the Valdo's Rest and farming the massive pack of Harbingers, but that's kind of gone. If you've tried the new version, which is the King Harbinger, Powerful Harbinger, whatever, it's a fraction of what it used to be. It's still not a bad thing to farm, but it's definitely not great. But overall, obviously, Headhunter is going to be a lot more of a chase item now. I think there's going to be a lot less people with Headhunter than we had before. Obviously, the top 1% are still going to have their Headhunter within the first few days. That's just how it is. But for the majority of players, Headhunter has probably become even less of an achievable goal, unfortunately. So because of that, anyways, gambling Headhunters is never a good thing. I'm just going to put that as an F tier, because I don't like gambling, in my opinion, especially if you're, a newer player or a casual or somebody who doesn't make that much currency. You should just sell them, bank those exalts, and then you can work slowly but surely towards your goal, whatever that may be. All right, next we have Woke Orb. So this basically stands for Sirus farming. So the way that you do this is essentially you pick the smallest map possible and you just run it as fast as possible. And then you spawn your conquerors, you get, kill them all, and then you basically just farm Sirus. If you're very good at this, if you're playing a very fast build, you can actually get these Sirus to spawns pretty quickly, and you're also killing all 4 conquerors every single time, which means you're also getting, potential for awakened gems from those, but also their exalts. And then Sirus is like, I guess, the big bonus where you have all his different uniques, which are not super, good, but you have obviously the awakened gems and the Sirus Awakener's Orb itself. Now, this has definitely gone up. It used to be a much lower tier, if I remember correctly, but in the first week of the league, I would say that Sirus is actually pretty good now. Obviously, because there's a lot less things to do, which are considered a lot, like very, very good, as you'll see when we go into a lot of other things. So that's probably going to be an A tier for me. It's not like crazy good because there's a ton of RNG. You could easily go through like 3 sets of full Sirus, 12 conquerors, 3 Sirus, and get absolutely nothing to show for. Now, clearly, you would still be mapping along the way. You would still be making money while mapping, but the conquerors and Sirus himself is very, very hit or miss. The thing is, you only have to hit once, and you can basically make bank. So A tier for me in the first week of league. All right, next we have a Bestiary Orb, which stands for Bestiary Farming. Now, this used to be absolutely SSS tier, like one of the best methods to make money in the game with the 6 accounts that people used to use, but that's completely gone now. Again, another change, which this one particularly I was all for, because I think it was kind of like stupid that the game was balanced around people having or needing 6 computers or whatever. So obviously it's no longer anywhere near as good as it was. There are still some ways that you could technically do it, but because there's the proximity, you would have to basically have all your alt accounts just kind of sitting there doing nothing, and then you would clear maps, and whenever you get one of those valuable beasts, you would port in all the other 5 accounts right before killing the beast. It's a lot of work. In my opinion, it's not worth it at all whatsoever. So I would probably put it as like a C. Now, of course, it's still going to be good. Maybe it's even going to be a B. It depends on these new recipes. There's a lot of new recipes, which is like add a modifier to a certain influence item. So like to an elder item, to a shaper item, etc., etc. the usage seems fairly limited because obviously you don't have any control over what the outcome is going to be. You're just adding a random influence. Obviously the whole split tag situation makes it so you can't split an item twice, so split beasts are nowhere near as required as they used to be. Same thing with imprints. There's not too much value because the way that people used to make a lot of money with imprints was basically in duoing with the splits. So you would imprint an item, split it, and then imprint it back in order to dupe the item essentially, so that you wouldn't have to go through, let's say, thousands of alterations or whatever other method, like for example on a blue base from Delve or blue essence base, whatever it was. So that's why those were really good. Now realistically the only option that you have, or the only thing that I can see, is technically if you're trying to make like a really GG item but only one of them, like potentially like a mirror tier, you would actually like imprint a blue base with 2 T1 stats and then just imprint spam until you get a third T1 on like the Regal, and then maybe another T1 on like an influence slam, and then bada boom bada bam, you've got yourself a mirror tier item, or just a triple T1 with a multi-modded item. So in my opinion it's either like a B or an A. I'm not exactly sure, but I'm going towards B at the moment, especially because they even nerfed the way that was really good to farm it on the actual Echoes of the Atlas, as they have nerfed the Echoes of the Atlas pretty much all the way through. Every single mechanic has been nerfed. So yeah, probably could be. Next I have a Chaos Orb. This stands for Chaos Orb Recipe. I've obviously advertised for the Chaos Orb. Now obviously if this was a day one, this would probably be like an S tier, or like at least an A tier. I think the Chaos Recipe is extremely good. For example, this league, before most people even had reached maps, I already had multiple exalts exclusively from the Chaos Recipe almost. So it's very good. Now in a week 1 scenario where exalts reach around 100C on day 3, and I personally stopped doing Chaos Recipe around 70C, which means technically it's not really good at all past like the first day or so of a league, or maybe the first 2 days, right? So it's not great, but if you're somebody who's low income, right, you're barely making any currency whatsoever, it's actually not that bad. Now I would have said that it was awful before, but with the new Path of Exile, if you want to call it that, where a lot of things got nerfed like hard, it's probably like a D tier. Like it used to be maybe like an F, now it's like a C or a D, to the point where you're actually going to at least make an exalt every few hours off of just the Chaos Recipe, especially if you're using the Chaos Recipe tool, which for some people that's actually a pretty decent amount of currency, especially due to the fact that league mechanics nowadays are just like throwing jewelry at you like crazy. Now one of the biggest issue with Chaos Recipe is that in T1 maps, T2, T3, whatever, you're gonna have struggle with jewelry, right? You're not gonna have enough amulets and rings in order to complete those Chaos Recipes. But if your build is capable of doing the league mechanics nowadays, like I said, is just basically throwing jewelry at you, which I think is quite nice. Okay, next we have Chayula Farming. Chayula Farming is actually an S tier in my opinion, in the first week of a league. Maybe actually not the first week, maybe the first 3 or 4 days, and then it's going to go down to an A tier, and after the first week, or even at the end of the first week, day 5, day 6, it's probably going to go down to like a C tier, and basically eventually it's going to reach an F tier, to where it's basically impossible to make any currency with it. Now the reason why it's actually so good early is because of the blessing. So the way that normal breach zones works, if you have a 50-50 chance of getting the blessing or not getting the blessing, and the thing is the Chayula blessing is incredibly powerful because of presence of Chayula. The amulet is pretty much the only thing people use it for, but anybody who's going low life on a fairly budget build will want presence of Chayula. It's going to make it so they can't get stunned, which is obviously like a big deal, but also adds a tremendous amount of energy shield for fairly budget, if you will, compared to some other alternatives. So it makes you a lot tankier, and also it's got all attributes, which is nice. It got 60 chaos resistance, which is massive. It basically takes your chaos resistance from -60 to 0, which makes it very possible to do a lot of extra content in the game that without is actually very difficult. For example, Al's Husband maps are absolutely tremendous, like awful, with -60 chaos res. So that's why it's an S tier. It goes down to probably an A tier around day 3, day 4. Day 5 probably going to be a B tier, and then it's only going to get worse. Now, why is it only going to get worse? Well, quite simply put, the more blessing is on the market, the less money you make off of it. The thing is, obviously, now that they have removed the ability to drop blessings from 100% Delirious Maps or from Delirious Maps in general, the value of blessings is actually going to be a lot more relevant. And another thing to mention about Chayula is that you can actually do it as part of the Feared Invitation, and the Feared Invitation is an S tier, probably like top 3 best methods of making currency in the entire game. So that's why I'm actually going to leave the Chayula as an S, because overall I think it's a very good thing to farm. And because of the lack of things that can actually get you the blessings, I believe only Chayula himself now, I think it's also been removed, the ability to drop blessings from even contracts or heists in general. So because of that, in my opinion, it's actually going to be quite good going forward. And I don't expect Chayula Breachstones and Chayula Blessings to ever go as cheap as they were in past leagues, which is not necessarily a bad thing for the people who are actually capable of farming it. Okay, next we have contracts for heist in general. So this is actually probably going to surprise a lot of people, but it's actually an S tier. This is kind of the state of the game now, where farming contracts, you just buy them in bulk, 2 or 3 C each. It's pretty much physically impossible not to make currency, both because you're getting an insane amount of jewelry for Chaos Recipe, but also just overall because of the amount of loot that you're actually getting. In my opinion, you're probably going to triple to quadruple to times 5 times 10 your money every single contract if you're buying them for 2 to 3 C each. And you can easily one of the best methods of making currency in the game. Not on par with Feared Farming, not on par with some other methods I'll talk about, but overall it's like an A++ or like an S-. It's not at the top tippity top, but for the people who don't mind the door league, it's actually incredibly powerful, especially once you have your rogues properly geared out and all that. It's really good. Okay, next we have a Delirium Mirror, basically. So this is Delirium Mirror. This was basically for the Delirium Zana Mod for 16 Chaos. Now this is not in the game at the very moment. It would be an S tier, obviously, if it was part of the game, but it's just not, so there's not much else to say about it. You get a Delirium Mirror. They have nerfed it a decent amount if we look at the patch notes, right? But still, even for 16 Chaos, the splinters alone are basically massive profit with the price of Simulacrums. And of course, everything else that you're also getting, especially paired with the Lexijoris nodes, it makes it even better. The nodes where you're getting, Delirious Maps, you're getting more Delirium bosses, you're getting more splinters from those bosses, twice the amount actually. So it's quite good. All right, next we have Delirium Orbs. So this is basically going to stand for, 20, 40, 60, 80, 100% Delirious Mapping. Now, clearly this is an S tier, probably around this, like one of the best methods of making currency in the game at the moment. Now, this is something that might be surprising to you, but the reality is that it's very annoying. The problem is that it's impossible to actually, dupe these maps anymore with fractured maps. So you actually have to go ahead and buy maps every single time, right? You're gonna have to, buy maps, but also buy Delirium Orbs every map. So if you're doing 100% Delirious maps, you're having to buy 5 Delirium Orbs every single map, which is a big annoyance, right? Not only because obviously it's pretty much impossible to get them in bulk unless you're willing to pay an insane amount, which to make the money back for, you pretty much need to be in a group play setting, or you need to like giga juice your maps, which means you need like probably like a headhunter, if not like a support. So it makes it so the content is not available to many people. There's not really any ways to cheese it anymore either, which that personally I think is a good thing. Obviously, you don't want the highest content in the game to be completely, cheesable to where people can just say, like, whatever, I'm gonna just cheese my way through and do the hardest content on the first day of a league. But, for example, this league, I've got some friends that are farming high percent, 80, 60, 80, 100% Delirious maps. They're paying extra for the Delirium Orbs. They're giga juicing their maps, scarabs, and all that. Obviously, having to pay extra for bulk on everything because the supply is just not there. But they are turning massive profits. They've already made, hundreds of exalts. So, of course, it's still alive, but the problem is really just, it's annoying. It's extremely annoying. You need a trader, or if you're going to be a solo player, you're going to be spending more time buying the orbs than even picking up the loot, which the meme was basically that, you were spending more time picking up loot in 100% Delirious maps than actually killing monsters. Well, now you're spending more time trading than picking up loot, and you're still picking up more loot or spending more time picking up loot than killing monsters. So overall, it's just not in a really good spot. But if you don't mind the hassle, it's definitely very good currency. Okay, next we have, which was supposed to be a little table flipping guy. This stands for flipping, obviously S tier. It's back to being at the top. There is nothing in the game that you can do currently in terms of playing the game that is going to rival flipping. Impossible. Not even feared farming, not even 100% delirious, not even bossing. Nothing is going to beat flipping anymore. And the reality of it is very simple. There's a lot of people who are wanting quality of life right now. Things like, buying, for example, those Delirium Orbs in bulk, and there is no supply. Buying Scarabs in bulk, there's no supply. Buying essences or fossils to craft in bulk, there is no supply. So if you want to put yourself out there and be the supplier by buying these items, a couple at a time, one at a time, whatever it is, and then selling them in bulk for a premium, you are going to make insane profit. We are talking about 5, 10 plus exalts per hour, which right now is actually potentially better than even some of the highest end content, and I'm not even exaggerating. So it's a little bit unfortunate, but that is actually the state of the game. Killing monsters is no longer at the top. Okay, next we have Fractured Fossil. Now this basically stands for deep delving. Now deep delving is pretty much dead. Now of course there's still money to be made delving, but there's no reason to go deep anymore. You can start getting Fractured Fossils at like depth 200. Now nobody really needs Fractured Fossils. I think there's something like 40C. And to be honest, I don't even know who would buy them for 40C, because you can't even do anything with them. Like, quite frankly, the best you can do is basically dupe a 6-link once. But for that, you would require, well, a 6-link and a right base and, all that stuff, which typically is not going to be worth it because people are dropping 6 links already. And then when Path of Exile 2 comes out, we won't even need 6 links anymore because the links are going to be on the jewels, right? So people are going to have like 26 links. So I'm not sure how I feel about delving yet, but for now it's probably like a D or an E tier. The only reason why it's not, or maybe like a C tier, the only reason why it's not like a D or an E or an F is really just because of the other things that are not deep delving that you're still going to get as you go deeper. For example, the node in delve that has to do with minion related stuff. So like, for example, a +1 Spectre chest, that is very, very good now, right? Because people used to get 1 base with the right item level, then they would get 6 white sockets and just dupe it, hundreds of times and just make bank off of that. You can't do that anymore, right? So if you find a right base with +1 Spectre and delve, your option is to try to dupe it once. It's like a 50% chance. If you have 1 mod, it's a 1 in 3. If you have 2 mods or more on it, or technically 2 mods, because otherwise you can't imprint it. So it's not super easy, but there's obviously going to be some value, things like rings with curses on them as well. But that goes back to, I feel like the flippers are making more money off of it than the actual players, because those are the guys who knows which one of these specific bases with specific curses or specific mods from delve actually have any sort of value. So for the average player, again, I feel like delve has not really been made too much better than what it really was. It just has been made, feel like there's no reason to really interact with it. At least that's how I've seen it so far. I've spoken to a few delving friends of mine, and that's deep delvers in standard, in league, people who typically push delve and all that, and they've pretty much all told me it just doesn't feel like there's any reason to delve anymore, which is a bit unfortunate because it was something that people really enjoyed. Okay, so next we have an incubator. Now this is for incubator farming, be it that you're farming emblems, right? Be it that you are farming simulacrums, or that you are actually just going out and buying them. Now, in my opinion, going out and buying them is just not the play. If anything, it's probably worth it to, farm them in simulacrums or in emblem farming. Emblem farming is something I'll talk about a little bit later on because it's not really existed anymore. The one build that was really able to take advantage of emblem farming or 5-way emblem farming is basically self-curse. The scaling in that encounter is so incredibly hard that there's no way to actually make currency from it unless you are getting massive amounts of rewards. The reason for that is that the emblems are not cheap. The emblems are required for people to unlock their 5-way map device, so they need to stay expensive, which right now, especially because they have nerfed the new Vastier nodes that people were doing in order to farm actual emblems themselves. They haven't really nerfed emblematic, the node itself, but they have removed high value targets, which is where most of the emblems are coming from. So farming emblems as part of the Echoes of the Atlas is now not very good anymore. And not only that, farming emblems themselves for currency is technically just bad overall. Because of that, incubators pretty much exclusively come from simulacrums now. So if you're farming simulacrums, obviously I would say it's good to use, you know, these incubators, but I wouldn't go out of my way. I don't think it's a good main currency strategy. I think it's good, like, if you have them, of course, it's a nice little bonus. So for that, I'll probably put it into like a D tier, maybe like an E tier. It's not good, but it's a nice little bonus, that extra exalt once in a while. Okay, so next we have Gift of the Goddess, which is like the upgraded lab where you're getting 7 enchants, 8 if you're using twice enchanted. Now, this is really good, because if you're actually able to complete it, you're getting 7 enchants. But the way that the new lab works is that you get 3 helmet enchants per time. So you're getting 21 helmet enchants, you know, 7 boots enchants. You're getting a lot of enchants, and the problem now is probably the supply with these, because a lot of people are just not interacting with harvest at all whatsoever, something I'll talk about a little bit later on. So it's really difficult to actually interact with this mechanic. But if you can, you know, get your hands on them and actually complete them, because they're pretty difficult, you do need a good build to be able to do this, especially if you're trying to speedrun it. It's actually very good currency. Some of the best in the game, and I'll make a video, I'll be making another video about lab running and the way that I would recommend setting up. And what I mean by that is that now that you have so much agency on the amount of enchants that you're getting, right, you want to have a lot of different items that you're enchanting at the same time. And that's obviously, like I said, something I'll be making a video about, because let's say you're running a lab and you get a melee enchant, you don't have a melee helm ready. Well, you know, that's a lot of currency that you might have just lost. Now, the reason why it's an S tier in the first week of League is because there's not a lot of people who are going to be lab running that early. So if you can get there before others, you're going to make bank. Give it like a couple weeks into the league, a month into the league, and it's probably going to start dropping very quickly. Both the price of the actual encounter itself and, of course, the price of the enchants are both going to, basically the price of the encounter is going to go up, the price of the enchants is going to go down. It's going to become exponentially worse. So it's really good, but you got to get on top of it early. Okay, next we have a Scarab. Now this is actually for Betrayal Farming. Betrayal is basically flipped on top of its head this league. I would still think it's pretty good. I don't think it's as good as it was, but now basically it's not so much about setting up your entire board like Cute Dog used to do or something with, you know, 17 million lines and alliances and whatever. It's more so about the boss itself. Now, why the boss? Because you actually get the T4 rewards, and the T4 rewards are in some cases the same as the old T3 rewards, but in some cases actually better. For example, Varici, now the T4 Varici can actually give you up to 6 white sockets. I'm not sure if it's equally weighted, but you know, being 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or whatever, but it's still very interesting for people who like having 6 white sockets on their gear. Obviously, it's going to be the way to go for future mirror tier item. There's Torah for XP on gems. There's, well, Id That Fled still for upgrading breach stones. There's just a lot of things that you can do. If this was like a day 1, actually I would be putting this in an S tier, and the reason for that is because of veiled items. But it's not day 1, it's a week 1 currency guide, and because of that it definitely loses its value, because people don't need a trillion items that are, you know, veiled. They only need so many, and it's only really the crafters who are in, you know, looking for those. And because, you know, breachstone upgrading has been changed a lot, now people are actually using them to upgrade their breachstones, not so much to upgrade uniques, especially for the worse breachstones, things like, you know, Esh, for example. Because of that, I'm going to put it as an A tier. It's still very good, but it's no longer the S tier that it used to be. I'm actually inclined to even put it in B tier, because I haven't heard anybody telling me that they are farming, you know, Betrayal and making absolute bank. I've heard people telling me they're doing quite well, but nowhere near what it used to be. So it's probably like an A minus, maybe a B plus, but I'll keep it an A for now. All right, next we have an oil. This is for the new Blighted Maps. They've been changed. There's now an oil that allow you to, you know, anoint corrupted items, which is really cool. Not only that, now the map quantity actually applies to the chest up to 20% of its value, I believe. They've changed the actual oils and the what you're getting from them as how they apply to the map itself. So there's a lot going on with Blighted Maps. I mean, Blighted Maps, the thing is, the main supply for Blighted Maps used to be 100% Delirious with Blight on it, but I believe those barely ever drop Blighted Maps anymore, so it's not so great, right? Because of that, we're mostly looking at people getting them from actually completing Blight encounters in their maps, and because that's slightly rare, the price of Blighted Maps is insane. On day one of the league, I believe I sold a T13 Blighted Maps for 50 chaos, which was like nearly an exalt, which is crazy. But clearly, if people are willing to pay that much, it's because oils are, you know, very, very expensive. Again, if this was a day one of the league, I'd probably be putting this in A or S tier. But because this is a week one guide, oils are only going to become more available. There's only going to be more supply. Therefore, the price is only going to tank. And the rest of the stuff that you get is only going to get worse. So I'd probably put it, again, like an A- or a B+. I'm inclined to probably put it as an A because I do feel like there's some value there. Especially because you can do them with, like, while you're literally AFK on certain builds, or, you know, with very minimal brain power. You can pretty much, depending on how you set up your towers, you can pretty much let your towers do the entirety of the job and just AFK them. So yeah, Blighted Maps are pretty cool. Okay, next we have a Jagged Fossil, and this stands for Shallow Delving. So by Shallow Delving, what I mean is basically low tier delving, which is something I already spoke about a decent amount when I talked about the old deep delving now being much easier and much earlier, people getting fractured at 200 depth, for example. So because of that, obviously shallow delving has got to be pretty good. Now the reason for that is that fossils mostly come from simulacrums. So you would think that fossils, low tier fossils, you know, jagged, dense, all that, are coming mostly from delve, but that's actually not really the case. A lot of them are coming from simulacrums. Now the thing is, without Zana Delirium Mod on the map device, and without having the ability to farm, you know, a tremendous amount of 100% Blighted Maps, the actual price of simulacrums, but also the rarity of them goes up. I believe it's over 2 exalt plus for farming simulacrums now. Typically it's like around 1 exalt. So because of that, the price of fossils is definitely going up when it comes to the lesser tier fossils, which also does affect crafting as well, but that's not as big of a deal. So I'd probably put it around the same as, you know, deep delving or the new deep delving. Shallow delving is probably like a C tier. I don't think you're going to make tremendous bank off of farming resonators or farming, you know, broken walls in delve, but you're definitely not going to go, you know, make zero currency either. Probably like a C tier. Okay, next we have Elder Guardians with Elder Bossing. That's going to be an S tier. Maybe actually more like an A plus tier, like an S minus. Now, if this was again like a day 1, day 2, it would definitely be like way up here. But the thing is, as more and more people start bossing, it becomes less and less profitable. The only reason why it really stays in S tier when it comes to you know, Elder and Elder Guardians is because of the invitations. The invitations are fairly difficult, and if you can do them fully juiced up, especially, you're going to be getting a lot of an advantage compared to everybody else, because you're getting basically twice the value out of every single one of your Guardians. And not only that, if you have Guardians aid on your Uncharted Realms, you're actually getting triple the Guardians, right? You're getting 1 Guardian, which is spawning another Guardian, and then you're getting another Guardian in the invitation. So 3 times the Elder and Shaper Guardians, which is really good for the fragments. Now there's only a bit of an issue with it, and I don't know if this is a bug, but currently, if you actually go and kill a random monster in like a T4 map, you can somehow get uniques that should be dropping exclusively from Guardian bosses. Same thing than Simulacrum bosses. People are getting a Salem while regular mapping. They're getting, you know, the Snake Pit Ring. So what happens because of this is that the price of these items, which are typically very, very high because the supply just is barely existent, because not that many people actually have access to that sort of content, is down the drain. Typically a snake pit at the start of the league is going to be around 200 to 300 chaos for the first couple days. This league on day 2, it was 8 chaos, right? Just to tell you guys how crazy. I'm not sure if this is intended or not, but if it is, it really hurts boss farming in general, because the only real source of income that you're getting now from the bosses, because their uniques are no longer worth anything, is their fragments and pretty much, obviously, the maps from the map itself, and that's it, which is, you know, kind of annoying. Obviously, though, if you have the Uncharted Realm passives, you're also getting a lot of bases, be it Shaper and Elder bases, and those have quite a bit of value. So that's pretty much where most of the money comes from, really. Shaper is the exact same thing. I'm not going to go ahead and repeat this entire thing. It's pretty much the exact same thing. You know, for some reason, you're able to get the uniques from really whatever in the game, which is probably not intended. I'm gonna guess it's a bug, because Chris himself said that Asylum was in fact not able to drop outside of simulacrums, but it actually ended up being able to. So yeah. Okay, next we have Uber Elder. Uber Elder is obviously an S tier in the first week of League. Things like Indigon, things like you know, Watcher's Eyes, things like everything basically. But the real kicker is going to be because it's part of the Feared, right? Because it's part of the Feared Invitation, and the Feared Invitation is literally insane. It pretty much doubles the value of every single endgame boss. You know, if you don't get a Bottled Faith when you're farming a Cortex, well, if you farm the Feared Invitation, you just have another shot. If you don't get a Chayula Blessing, you farm the Feared, there's a potential that you actually get a Chayula's Blessing, right? So there's a lot of extra stuff like that that is basically doubling the value of your endgame bossing. So clearly that's an S tier. Same exact thing for Uber Atziri. Not exactly amazing by itself, especially this league, because of the Val Reliquary Key basically giving you all the Uber Atziri uniques for free, or nearly free. It's really not as rare as some people, as Chris said it. He said it's going to be the rarest reliquary key, but I know a guy who's gotten 3 of them already, so But either way, obviously, Uber Atziri as part of the Feared, especially if you're capable of doing it, especially if you're able to juice it, it drops more than an entire Maven's Ritz. So there's a lot of value there if you're able to do it. Obviously, though, the Feared is pretty much, you know, the hardest content in the game nowadays. All right, next we have Offering of the Goddess, which is basically the same thing as we spoke earlier, but instead of getting 7 enchants, you get 1. So regular Uber Lab farming, it's probably somewhere like a C. I do think that it's a lot better than it used to be. I think I had it in like D or E before, and the reason for that is, well, because you get 3 helmet enchants now, and you get a boots enchants, right? So you're getting a lot more agency on the potential for profit. And if you set up properly, which, like I said, I'll be making a video about, there's definitely some potential for currency there. Okay, next we have a T4 seed, which stands for Harvest, F tier, trash. I don't know why or who would ever spend 12 chaos on the map device for this. It's awful. Crafts are selling for ridiculously low prices because there's very little to do with them. The actual encounter themselves are way too long for what you get. It's actually worse than what I thought it was. And it sucks to say, but I can't help but say I said it, you know, I called it. It's literally way worse than even what I would have expected. Right now, Harvest is only good to reforge cluster jewels and reroll your maps. That's it. So they killed it, and then they killed it again, and then they literally murdered it to the point where Harvest is basically irrelevant. And yeah, like I said, can't help but say I called it. All right, so next we have a Resonator. This stands for basically any sort of crafting. So I have listed here, I have Essence, Alt Spamming, Chaos Spamming, Fossil Crafting, basically any sort of crafting in the game. This is actually an A tier. Now, you might have thought that I was going to say this was like an SSS tier, like some of the craziest currency in the game. I'm actually almost inclined to put it into a B tier. Now, you might be wondering why. Why is crafting no longer as good as it was? Well, it is a little bit more specific to this current league, which obviously is Ultimatum. But the reality is Ultimatum is offering rares that are very, 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 very good. To be able to beat the rares that you're getting from Ultimatum, you basically need influenced items, you need endgame items, and you need endgame crafting, which is something that most players will not have access to in the first week of a league. First off, because there's lack of supply, but second off, because of the materials, the bases, and everything else is very, very expensive. Now, another reason is because beast crafting for the bases, that people used to dupe, was pretty much the go-to for early game crafting. so the crafters were able to basically make a base and then just dupe it over and over and over again, you know, get some influence on it, multi-mod, whatever, and then just ship it and make incredible amounts of currency. That's all gone, right? So the basic methods of making currency when it comes to crafting have severely diminished. It's still very good, it's just nowhere near as good as it used to be. In the first day of a league, it's probably not even relevant. I don't think anybody is going to be crafting going forward. I've tried to look at a lot of people who have a lot of current public currency, and pretty much none of them are crafters. Meanwhile, in any current leagues, pretty much all of them would have been crafters, which is very, very interesting to see a meta shift. And the reason for that is really mostly because the league mechanics is offering rares that are so good that the odds of actually crafting one that's better than what's being offered from the league mechanic is almost irrelevant, almost impossible. Now, going forward in future leagues, if the rares are not as good, clearly you would be able to go back to crafting your own stuff, and obviously crafting for profit as well, but it's nowhere near as good as it used to be, and that is because of the smart loot that is being offered from the Ultimatum League mechanic, which is definitely something that I never thought I would say, quite frankly. Okay, next we have a prophecy, which stands for prophecy farming. Now, this is actually better than it used to be. Probably something like an A tier. I don't think it's like insanely good, especially because it seems like there might have been some sort of shadow nerfs to them, especially some of the prophecies which are mostly sought after. It's still probably, you know, A plus or S minus. It's up there in some of the better methods of making currency in the game, especially now that you can offer things in bulk. The only problem, because it's kind of a double-edged sword to be able to offer things in bulk. On one side, you're able to sell your prophecies in bulk easier. On the other side, because it's easier to sell them, people are not willing to pay as much, right? People who used to pay a lot more for prophecies in bulk because they were going through, for example, TFT in order to get them, now they can actually just use the regular trading website, as we do have bulk prophecies listed over there. And that, like I said, kind of really hurts the value of bulk prophecies to where, you know, it definitely went down a little bit in tier, unfortunately. Okay, so next we have normal Atziri. Now, normal Atziri is not good, but it's not bad. It's like an in-between. Obviously, you get the Uber Atziri fragments, which are always going to be pretty valuable, pretty decent, because people need them in order to farm the Feared. But, you know, you're not really getting anything else. If it was day one of the league, it would probably like an A or a B, but as you get further into the league, like this being a week one strategy or currency guide, it's definitely not really up there anymore. The boots, you know, definitely aren't as good as they are at the very beginning. The flask is pretty much cheap, like free, honestly, unless you have like a perfect roll. There's just not a whole lot of currency to be made there, unfortunately. All right, next we have Simulacrum. Simulacrum is still an S tier. Some of the richest players currently, at least publicly richest players, are farming Simulacrums from what I've seen. Obviously, they give you everything in the game. And even at like 2 or 2.5 or exalts each or whatever, it's pretty much impossible not to make currency because of the price of everything else, right? The problem with Simulacrums used to be that if they were expensive and people were farming, for example, 100% Delirious and getting, you know, Scarabs and Breachstones and all that and Blessings and whatever, right? All these different things that were also dropping in Simulacrum had way less value. Now, pretty much any sort of person that's able to offer things like fossils or, you know, scarabs or even, what are they called? Catalysts or whatever in bulk has a massive advantage. And because all of those, literally all of those drop from Simulacrums, there's a lot of value there. So that's an S tier. Okay, next we have a little Spark Gem, which actually stands for Farming XP. Farming Gem XP is something that not a lot of people do because it's very boring. The thing that you need to know about this game is that your character, as you progress, as you level, get diminishing returns, but gems do not. So you could actually level gems as fast in, you know, low tier content than high tier content. Obviously not really, because higher tier content does give more XP, but the thing is low tier content can be farmed faster. So things like auto bomber builds or whatever, there's a lot of shield charge builds as well. Shield charge mixed up with auto bomber. People farm things like even, I believe one of the go-to zones is actually Blood Aqueducts, and they're going to put like 30 different gems on their character and just level them up to level 20 and just either flip them and level them again or sell them or corrupt them for level 21. There's actually a decent amount of money to be made there. because obviously people care about having level gems, and especially auras, things like zealotry, right? You don't even need quality on them for a lot of those gems. So because of that, and of course because you can scale this, right, with awakened gems, with also alternate quality gems, you can actually make quite a bit of currency. In the first week of the league, I'd probably put it somewhere between you know, C and B or something. It's not like the craziest currency in the game, but it's basically brain dead currency, right? You just hop into Blood Aqueducts on like a shield charge build that has some sort of something that's able to basically blow up the entire screen, and you just hold down one button, shield charge through, back and forth and back and forth and back and forth, and that's how you make currency. The advantage that is again that you don't even have to pay attention to what you're doing. The disadvantage is that there's no real way to scale it, and it's boring as hell. That's pretty much it. Okay, next we have a stacked decks, which is for stacked deck gambling. So this is actually a hit or miss. Obviously, if you get lucky, it can be good. If you get unlucky, it can be awful. It does also come down to the price of stacked decks themselves. I'm not a fan of gambling, so I'm probably going to put it into D or E, probably like a D tier, I would say, on the first week of the league, because I feel like stacked deck prices, because nobody wants to gamble, are actually very, very cheap at the start of the league. And recently exalts have basically been skyrocketing up to like 100 chaos and just sitting there. Like this league, day 2, we had 100 chaos exalts, right? So because of that, you're actually able to buy quite a lot of stacked decks, and you only need to get, you know, one half decent card every like 50 or 100 of them in order to not lose money. Now, I still don't think it's the, you know, the smartest thing to do in the world, but if you're feeling lucky, it's actually still better than farming harvest. So that says something. Okay, next we have a Mariketh Emblem, which is for 5-way emblem farming. Obviously, I've already mentioned this when I was talking about Legion earlier in the video. It's nowhere near as good as it used to be, because the one build that was able to do it properly doesn't exist anymore. So you would need emblems to be extremely, extremely cheap to make up for the lack of basically drops that you're getting. Now, if there was no way of getting timeless jewels in the entire game outside of these encounters, I would say that they would actually stay pretty relevant. But now we actually have divination cards that allow us to get timeless jewels. So because of that, it's not so great. Probably somewhere like a C tier or like a D tier even, right? We went from like an SS tier, like a crazy good tier, to pretty meh. Obviously, though, if you're playing in a party situation where you have like a support, like an Orb bot, and maybe a curse bot or something, and you're able to actually get, you know, 3-4 bars of loot the same way that you kind of used to be able to with a self-cursed character, you are actually probably looking at something like an A or maybe even potentially an S tier. But because most people are solo players and most people will not have a build that's able to do it whatsoever without being, you know, self-cursed, especially without Headhunter, it's like honestly just focus on getting your 5-way map device. So open up a 4-way emblem, kill one of the bosses each time, get your 5-way map device, which is going to help you juice a little bit extra, you know, an extra fragment, an extra scarab, whatever it is. And just leave it to that, because farming the emblems themselves, in my opinion, is absolutely not worth it, especially due to the price of the emblems now that they're basically not being supplied nowhere near as much anymore, right? Because they're no longer dropping, like I mentioned earlier, anywhere near as much in the New Vastia region. It makes it so they are actually keeping a lot more value than what they were before. For example, the red one, which I believe is the Val one, used to be very, very cheap, and now it's like 30-40 chaos, which is like crazy expensive compared to the 5 or 10 chaos that we're used to paying. And finally, we have regular mapping, which is this little Val temple here. Stands for regular mapping. So regular T14, T15, you know, endgame mapping. Probably like an A tier. I don't think you're going to make a crazy amount of currency through just, you know, going through the game and mapping. I've been catching up with a lot of my friends, streamers, a lot of friends that I know that are currently doing exactly that. And it looks like they're making an X or 2 an hour. That's it. Now, an X or 2 an hour in the old Path of Exile, which was before all of these nerfs, all of these changes, was pretty awful. In the new Path of Exile, it's actually pretty respectable to be making around 2x an hour. It used to be the minimum that I would consider to be, you know, doing something worthwhile. Now it's actually considered pretty decent. You know, there's obviously some methods in the game, which I've mentioned previously, which can net you way more than that. obviously time will tell if these methods hold up, as you know, the economy actually starts to get more and more saturated with these endgame items that are coming from a lot of these methods, you know, replica uniques or, you know, alternate quality gems, things from the feared, etc., etc. Time will tell. But overall, that's pretty much the look of the economy and what I would recommend. For solo players, I think that the way to go right now is either boss killing, you focus on the feared. The feared invitation is significantly better than all of the other ones, even combined. And then also, if you have a mapping character, focus on Simulacrum farming if you're capable of getting at least 5 bars of loot every single time. And if you are basically in a group setting, consider obviously Delirium Orbs 40, 60, 80%, especially if you can maybe, you know, get a carry and a support so that you're able to throw on a little bit of magic find on your character. You know, remember to use scarabs to juice up those maps. Things like maps, things like bases are basically non-existent this league, good influence bases, but also maps are incredibly expensive. I'm not sure what they did to map sustain, but this league, it's some of the lowest that I've ever seen. Even your giga map juicers are actually having issues with sustaining maps, or at least being able to have enough to be able to, you know, mass sell them. So if you're able to farm some of that content, Delirium is known to drop tons and tons of maps, especially paired, you know, with different league mechanics, with scarabs and all that. So very interesting strategy there. And if you don't mind it, obviously, you know, blasting some contracts is going to be incredibly powerful. Lots and lots of currency is going to be coming from that. Blast some contracts, get those reveals, and then just go straight into blueprints and just rinse and repeat. Buy the markers if you have to. Make sure to put some good gear on your actual rogues, and then you'll be blasting. And for very early, especially, but even now to this day, like right now, it's actually still pretty good currency. Around 3-4 days in, Chayula Farming is quite good. The thing is, you need a little bit of currency before you get into it, because if you go, you know, if you go in with very little currency, you could get 2 or 3 dry runs, and then you're completely out of money because it's like 1.5 exalt each run or something. So because of that, definitely a little bit more of a gamble. But if you're doing this paired with the feared farming that I spoke about earlier, you're going to be making ridiculous amounts of money. A friend of mine made over 100 exalts in one single day farming the feared. Maybe he got a little bit lucky, but that's for him to tell. On that note, I do want to say a huge thank you to my supporters: Flame Scorpion, Richard, Willity, Alex, Jordan, Emma, Raymond, Tim, Scott, Lost with the Map, Grimoire, Nathaniel, Kremis, Justin, Kevin, the other Justins, So Nice, Axel, Mercury, and Bitzen, as well as a huge thank you to the people listed here, as well as the people who wish to remain anonymous and who have supported me in the past. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this updated video. I have to say that I'm not a fan of the state of the game. It feels that you basically have very little in terms of options for endgame farming. And I feel like they are definitely going to have to review some of these changes, because the top tier players, at least, are basically not really seeing any sort of end game like I had predicted, which again, you know, I called it. I hate to say it, to be honest. I'd love to say that I think I was completely wrong, but at the time, for the moment anyways, it doesn't seem to be the case. So I'm really hoping that GGG goes back on some of these decisions, as I think that player retention is not going to be good if they actually keep the game in its current state. Again, hopefully you guys enjoyed, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.